Hi, I'm Kay of CleverSomeday.com. I've got some great news for those of you who want to engrave or engrave better with your Cricut Explore machine. There have been some big developments that I'm excited to tell you about, but let me get the bad news out of the way first. There is still no Cricut branded engraving tool for the Explore series machines. That means that you will need a third-party tool, and a third-party tool means that if you were to incur any damage to your machine from engraving, it wouldn't be covered under your warranty. For this reason, most people simply wait until their machine is a year old, because that's when the warranty expires. When it comes to these third-party engraving tools for the Explorer, there are a few choices out there. The most popular by far is the Chomas Engraving tip, which is what I will be using in this video. This tool has a cone-shaped tip and fits in the blade side of a Cricut Explorer. Chomas also makes a pointier precision tip, and you will also find blunt tips out there, but for general engraving of metal or acrylic, I prefer the standard tip. I should mention that if you have Chomas's A-side tool, which was discontinued several years ago, this video does not apply, but there are plenty of older videos that do. Now, I've been happily using Chomas brand tools in my more than 1-year-old cutters since the Expression era, but it's no secret that I wasn't a fan of this current tool or any other blade side engraver for the Explorer. That is, I wasn't a fan until now, thanks to some changes Cricut made to Design Space in September of 2020, which we'll get to shortly. When you get your engraver and hold it next to the Cricut blade housing, lining up the shoulders, you can see right away that the engraver is too long. Fortunately, there's an easy fix, and that is to load the tool into the clamp a couple of millimeters up from the fully seated position so that the tip falls roughly where the blade tip would, or even a little higher. You can eyeball it, but I like to use an O-ring for consistency and so I don't forget. Whatever you do, don't run your Cricut with the bare tool fully seated. It's just too risky even for an out-of-warranty machine. In addition to being safer, lifting the tool allows us to take advantage of all of the Explorer's available clearance, so we can enjoy engraving acrylic and metal up to 2 millimeters thick. Pre-cut acrylic shapes that thin used to be hard to find, but now vendors like Craft Chameleon carry an array of Explorer-friendly blanks, so that's another bit of good news right there. I'm going to use one of those blanks in a simple example project so I can teach you the rest of the new tricks to great engraving with your Explorer. So here is a Design Space project I've already started, with my machine set to explore and a couple of elements already on the canvas. I'll call them the template and the design. The small one on the left is a shape or template, the exact size and shape of my blank, which in this case is the rounded rectangle acrylic tag from Craft Chameleon. Depending on where you buy your blanks, you may get a matching template from them, or if it's just a simple shape, you can recreate it yourself with the Shapes tool. In addition, I'll link up some shared templates for common blanks in the video description. The colorful design on the mat is from Cricut Access and is what I've chosen to engrave today. I have tons of info in my Facebook group on how to choose or adapt a design for engraving. I normally don't recommend standard cut files, which this is, but because it has these interior lines, I think it will work fine and make a nice quick example. I need to set up my design to engrave, so with it selected in the Layers panel, I go to the Line Type menu, and right away you will see that Engrave is not on the list. That's because, as we said, Cricut doesn't officially support engraving on an Explorer. Up until recently, we would select the Cut line type because it was our only choice for an engraver in the blade side. However, this was never a great solution because the Cut line type programs the path to compensate for an angled blade. Using cut with a straight tool, like an engraver, gave us sloppy results, especially on small details. This is why I was so overjoyed when Cricut added a new line type category to the desktop version of Design Space to support its foil transfer system. Yes, these foil line types are great news even if you don't have the foil tool, because they are programmed to drive a straight tool, which means they give nice crisp engraving. There's one caveat, and that's that the foil line types are not supported on the mobile apps at this time. So unless and until Cricut changes that, you'll need to work from a computer to take advantage of these new features. As you know from your everyday cutting, the material setting you choose determines the amount of pressure applied to the blade. My testing tells me, however, that material setting has little effect on the pressure when using a foil line type. The pressure does change, however, based on which foil line type you choose, increasing from fine to medium to bold. I want the maximum pressure for engraving, so I'm going to choose foil bold. Because we aren't using the cut line type, we can't specify multiple passes in a custom setting. I know I want at least 2 passes on this, so I'm going to duplicate the engraving design, select both copies, and click Align and pull down to center. Go ahead and group it. Now you have a stack that will engrave twice exactly in the same spot. My next step is to resize the design to fit the blank. The blank is 1 1/8 inches wide, but since we are going to use a placement technique that is very precise, I can make the design a full inch wide and still not worry about running off the blank. To position the design on the template, I select both and align center. That's too high because of the hole, so now if I hold down the Shift key as I drag, I can constrain movement to keep that left to right centering and move the design up and down to where I like it. When you're happy with the position, select both and click Attach. The next step applies only to clear acrylic. Because we want to engrave the back to be viewed from the front, we choose Flip Horizontal to mirror everything. You may already know that getting the engraving to fall in the exact right place on the physical blank is by far the biggest challenge when engraving with any Cricut. There are a lot of approaches to this that are used for the maker, including a couple of good ones I developed myself. These methods will also work for the Explorer, but today I'm going to show you a new twist on an old method that the maker doesn't support. This temporary jig method is commonly used on other brands, but has been inconvenient, if not impossible, on Cricuts until now. The idea is to put scrap cardstock on the mat, cut the shape of the blank out of it, then replace the cutout with the actual blank and engrave it, all without removing the mat. The Cricut is only designed to load the mat accurately within a couple of millimeters each time, so if you can keep the mat loaded, you eliminate that major source of potential mismatch, as well as counting and eyeballing errors. So for the temporary jig method, we need to cut first, then engrave. But with the template set to cut, if I click Make It, you can see from the list beside the miniature mat at the upper left that it is going to cut last. The line types always go in the same order, and we can't change that. But we can change the line type. That's right, not only are we going to use the foil line type for engraving, but we are going to use it for cutting too. I cancel out and go back to my canvas, and now I'm going to select just my template layer by clicking it on the Layers panel and set its line type to foil medium, since this will give me enough pressure to cut through cardstock. Now when we click Make It, we can see that the order is foil medium, which represents our cutting, followed by foil bold, which represents our engraving, which is just what we want. So when we are prompted for foil tool medium tip, we will use the blade, and the foil tool bold tip prompt will signal us to use the engraving tool. Make yourself a note of this if you want, but you can also just remember that you want to cut first. I'm going to move my design with template attached away from the upper left here on the Prepare screen. With the Explorer, you don't want blanks within about 3/4 inch of the right and left margins because of the rollers, but anywhere inside that is fine, since you can move the star wheels. Keep in mind that we will be loading the blank while the mat is in the machine, so we want to choose a convenient spot for ourselves to work. Keeping it near the top makes it so there's a hard surface underneath, but you don't want it so close that you don't have room to maneuver, so I'm going to put it right below the 1 inch mark. I have loaded my mat, which doesn't have to be new or super sticky or photogenic, with a scrap of cardstock. Because my scrap is pretty large, I don't have to worry about making sure it is in the right place on the mat. But if you are using smaller pieces, be sure it matches up with your preview mat, of course. And in case you're wondering, you don't need any special kind of cardstock, just your everyday stuff will do. And any color is fine. Really, whatever you have on hand. I click Continue, and on the Make screen, you'll see that the material setting is displayed there according to my dial. But even though this is the material setting I ultimately want, I have to turn my dial to Custom. That's because if you have your dial on anything besides Custom, it will get stuck on processing when you press Go. Once the dial is on custom, we'll pick a material from the computer. As I said before, material choice doesn't seem to matter much, so I always just use medium cardstock, which I have favorited here. Once I click that, it prompts me for the foil tool medium tip, which in Kay's temporary jig secret code is translated fine point blade. So I install my regular everyday blade, slide my white star wheels to either side if they aren't already, and then press the flashing load button to pull in the mat. Press go and the Cricut will cut out the template shape that will serve as our slot. Because it thinks we are foiling, it's going to scroll up to the top and pause for us when it's done with this step. Oh yeah! That's another great thing about the foil line type. It's designed to give us room to work between steps without removing the mat, and that's fantastic for more than just foiling. I'm using an X-Acto style knife to lift and remove the cutout carefully without moving the rest of the cardstock. It's not going to be a perfectly clean cut because it was set to foil, but it will do fine for our purposes. And if I have trouble getting it free, then I have the knife handy. My screen is now prompting me for the foil tool bold tip, so I take out the blade and put in the engraver, lift it up in the clamp, as we talked about before. I have already put double-sided tape on the viewing side of my blank, and I am removing the protective layer from the other side, which is the one I want to engrave onto. It doesn't matter in this case, but if your blanks are not symmetrical, you will need to pay attention to which side is which. I'm going to peel the backing off the double-sided tape, flip the blank over, and line it up in the slot. With this small blank, it's mostly awkward only because my camera is in the way. But if you have a bigger blank, so you're working past the door, you may want to slide a clipboard or something underneath the mat to give you a more rigid and flat surface to work with. Take your time getting the blank square into the slot, fully seated and secure, as this is critical to precise alignment. As always, I put tape on top of the leading and trailing edges for extra security. I try to keep the tape away from the engraving zone, but don't sweat it if you engrave over the tape a little. I also have a ruler tucked into the door slot underneath to help keep the mat flat. These things are more important for larger blanks, but a good habit to get into in general. I double check that I have the right tool installed, that my star wheels are out of the way, and that my warranty has already expired. Everything checks out, so I press go. Because we haven't unloaded the mat, the Cricut can go precisely to the right spot to engrave. Because we stacked duplicate copies, it will do 2 passes of the design. I love these little tags because they are so versatile. You can use them for key rings, zipper pulls, or even as a gift tag. The same process works for any acrylic or metal blank. So, for instance, you could do acrylic inserts for LED light bases, aluminum bracelets, or lots of other things. So to review the important things you need to know for great engraving with the Explore. Damage from third-party tools is not covered under your warranty. Your third-party tool needs to be at the same height as your blade or higher. Your engraving design should be set to foil bold, and because of this, you need to engrave from a computer and have the dial on your Explorer set to custom. For material setting, use medium cardstock, 80 pound. I have lots of related info, like how to make your engraving look solid, how to engrave photos, and how to make a reusable jig, where to get templates, and more, that I'll link up for you in the video description, so be sure to check that out. When it's finished and before I unload the mat, I'm going to lift off most of the loose dust with a piece of tape so I can get a good look. If I wanted to do more passes on this blank, or if I wanted to swap this blank out for a new one so I can do more of the same design, I would take the engraver out, press the go button, let it run the cutting pass with no blade, then, when prompted for the foil tool, bold tip, put the engraver back in and press go again. Don't unload the mat until you are sure you are done, because once you do that, you have to start over cutting a new jig to get this kind of accuracy. I hope you enjoyed learning this new and improved way to engrave with an Explorer, and that you will be super successful with your engraving projects. I also want to invite you to join my Cricut Engraving with Clever Someday Facebook group, where you can see lots of examples and get help. As always, I really appreciate you watching, liking, sharing, and commenting. Thanks so much for watching.